What's going on? So today I'm going to be showing you how to use light as a compositional tool, making your environments pop while using the new Megalights feature in 5.5. This technique will help you level up your environments and give your portfolio that extra layer of detail that will have people thinking that you light like a pro. In addition, I'm excited to announce that I'm launching a Discord channel here where we can all share ideas, post art, and so much more. So without further ado, let's get started. I want to point a few things out before we get the Megalight set up and actually go through the tutorial here. One of which is you guys can actually follow along with what I'm going to be doing here using this same environment. This environment is this Old West learning environment, which is free on Fab. So if you just type in Old West Learning, this will pop up. One thing to note is this environment is only supported up to 5.2. So what you're going to want to do if you're using this is just create a project in 5.2 and just migrate it to 5.5. It works perfectly fine. That's what I did, and I didn't have any issues with it. I will say, and the reason why we're using this environment is because it really just is a great environment for this type of material, for lighting. And I do really advise if you're someone who is really interested in lighting, maybe you want to be a lighting artist, or maybe just want to hone in that skill and work on that craft, is using this environment and just creating like any and every kind of lighting scenario you can think of, day, night, dusk, noon, whatever it might be, different scenarios. Because this environment really works for this sort of material. The other thing is actually going over the documentation whenever possible. So whenever these new tools, these new workflows come out, a really important thing to do is actually go on to their roadmap, their documentations, and actually go through and read what they have to say. Read what are the limitations, what are the times and places to actually use this, what are all the console commands to use, what's the most optimal way to use this. This is really important because when you are using some of these tools, you may not know it when you first start using it, but some of them are really workflows in which need to be implemented, generally speaking, like at the very beginning of a project, and so Megalights, for example, asks you to use ray tracing. And so if maybe you're working on a game and you're not going to be using ray tracing, then this likely isn't something for you to use. In our case, though, we are going to be using it. But again, I just wanted to call this out. It has all the console commands that are going to be useful, all the different performance. Basically, anything that you might want to know about it is here. Other than what I'm going to show you, which is how to make some pretty looking stuff. So let's do this. So let's start Megalights. And what we're going to want to do is go into project settings. And you could always just search and type it in. I'm going to find this manually. And so we're going to go here, project settings, rendering, and we're going to scroll down. And what we're going to want to do is enable under direct light right here. We're going to want to turn on Megalights, and then we are going to want to enable ray trace shadows and support hardware ray tracing. So if you are having issues with performance using Megalights, one thing to try is swapping between shadow maps and virtual shadow maps. In their own documentation, they do note how shadow maps, or rather virtual shadow maps, can be a bit heavy using Megalights because it's doing additional computations. So if maybe you are using this to implement into a game and you want to try to save a few frame rates, just try swapping between virtual shadow maps and shadow maps. All right. So let's jump in. So when we are talking about sculpting with lights, painting with lights, this is something often done in movies and games to really accentuate the environment, to accentuate the shot. And so before we actually jump in and start setting up lights, there's a few really important things to actually note. And these are things which, as a lighting artist, it's something that you're going to want to be aware of. It's something that people who are currently professional lighting artists are aware of, and it's something I'm going to help you guys be aware of. So when you are doing lighting, think of lighting as a tool for composition. So composition meaning like, where is the eye going? Where do you want the viewer to look at? And this is something that early on isn't really something you think of, right? Oftentimes we think of good lighting, at least early on when we're trying to light our environments. We think of lighting as just, we want to make it look pretty, whatever that means, or, we want to make this pop or that pop or whatever. But try to think of it as, I want the viewer's eyes to go here as opposed to there. How do I do it? And it's not just light, it's shadow as well. So you want to use highlights and lowlights to really draw the eye. So here, for example, part of this also is environmentally the build. So in this shot, for example, we have this road that goes here, which naturally sort of leads your eye up, right? Obviously in this shot, the main focus is going to be this building right here. So we want to draw as much focus and attention to this actual building. And so in this shot, and this is what we're going to be going over here in a moment, is in this shot, part of it is, just placing the camera in a good way where it sort of lines up. The other thing is going to be using shadows, for example, to block the eyes from sort of lingering over here. It's going to be using highlights to force the eye here. So we're using directionality, in this case, in both the environmental build as well as in the actual lights and shadows itself. And same thing for the interior. So the interior is similar, but it's in here we're using something more akin to what's known as an S-curve, which is another really good compositional tool that you can use at your disposal. So, oops, go in here. So anytime you can use directionality to guide the eye. So here I would actually probably even move this light a little bit in another little direction. But an S-curve essentially means this sort of S shape here, right? And so this also goes with the environmental build. Your eyes like to take the path of least resistance when looking at an image. And so when we're looking at this image, it just kind of feels good because your eyes have this sort of clear S-type shape to sort of linger through, to sort of adventure through. And we help accentuate this with the actual lights. So as we come here, we see we have one light here. So this kind of does its own S in a way. And so again, I'd probably actually move this probably down here, which I might do here in a moment anyway. But so then we have our own S going here with the lights as well. And also a bit of directionality and, shadows and things like that. But again, talking specifically about using lighting as a tool for composition, it can be really important. So when you're looking at your scene, for example, and you're looking at something like this, and you are thinking, where do I put the lights? Where would be the most effective places to put my lights? Think of compositionally, allow the eyes to sort of play ping pong back and forth as they sort of go from one point to the next to the next. So that's it for composition. I can go on and on about that, maybe in another video. But yeah, let's actually jump in and let's do this. So I'm gonna make a new lighting level in this case. So lighting test, just gonna drag and drop this in. And we're going to just start from scratch. And we're gonna start from scratch. So for this, we're going to use the HDRI backdrop. You can always set up your own sky sphere if you'd like. If you come in here and you don't have HDRI backdrop, you can just go in here into plugins and enable HDRI backdrop. The other one that we're going to go over, really because it's something that's not used as often, but it's a really great tool to help with lighting your environments, is going to be color correct regions. So just go ahead and enable this as well, as we are going to be using this. Okay, and then once you restart it, we're going to go in here and we're going to type in HDRI backdrop. Bring it in. And when you bring it in, it's going to look like this. It's going to be just kind of weird, right? So we're going to want to fix that. So first and foremost, we're going to want to push it down underneath the environment, and then we're going to want to make it larger. So we'll make this like 15,000, and suddenly we have lights showing up. So we're done. I'm just kidding. So what we're going to do after this is we're going to want to actually balance the ambient light and the sky. And for the sky, we're actually going to use our own HDRI here. And so I've downloaded a few, I played with a few. A really good resource is both Polyhaven and a place called 2G Academy, which is where I actually got this HDRI that I'm going to be using here. And I'll post both of the links to those sites down below. But go ahead and put this in here. And then for this, we're going to go ahead and go into the skylight. And we're going to change this from captured scene to specified cube map. And we're going to want to take this and place it in here. The reason we do this as opposed to use captured scene and just control, the actual full-on intensity with this is because we want to have individual control of the skylight as well as the sky dome, as well as the actual image here. So that's why we do it that way. And so the next thing we're going to do is going to grab a post process volume. And of course, scroll down and turn on infinite extent unbound. And make sure also in your post-process volume that Megalights is going to be checked on. So it is a feature that you can turn off and on within your post-process volume. And the next thing we're going to do is go in here to exposure, and I'm just going to set this to 0, 0, 0. And there's plenty of different ways in which you can balance these, obviously, play around with it. I always encourage exploration in your own developments with, doing any sort of lesson, any sort of tutorial. But for this, we're just going to use these values right now. The other thing which I like to do, this is kind of a remnant from working in virtual production, as well as just whenever you're doing a darker environment in general. One thing that can be useful to do is right here under film, go to slope, and it's by default it's at 0.88. I like to put it down to like 0.8. And what you'll notice, like the difference between 0.88 and 0.8, 0.8 just lifts it a little bit. Like it's not super noticeable. If you go down to like 0.7, it starts to become a bit too even. But we put it down to 0.8, it just lifts it a little bit. You never really want your scene to go into like pure black. I mean, you can, it's just not that interesting, right? If like there's just nothing to look at there because it's just a black blob. So if you can just lift the shadow a little bit, it'll just help a little bit more. It'll also help with just balancing the shadows in general too. All right, and then next what we're going to do is we're going to go in here. We're going to balance this a little bit. So when we're looking at this right here, the sky is still a little bit too bright. And so we're going to drop this down, say 0.5. That matches a bit more. This value right here, this intensity, you don't want to bring it down too much. Like if we bring it down to like 0.1 or something, unless you're going to do like a really dark scene and maybe you're going to rotate this to like a darker side or something. But if we're going to show like the brighter parts of the sky, it just looks kind of muted and unnatural. So like 0.5 is probably like the lowest you want to go. What you can do instead is either find a different sky or just like rotate this to like a darker section if you wanted. All right, and so from here, what we're going to do is we're going to grab a directional light, bring that in, and we're going to find just a good place, a good rotation for what we're trying to achieve. So again, whenever you're doing this, whenever you're lighting your scenes, always coming back to like, what is the goal? Like, what are you trying to achieve here? You know, so in this case, we're trying to achieve, you know, maximum visibility on this barn, right? We want the eyes to go straight to this barn. At the same time, we want the entire scene to look interesting. We want it to look quote unquote good, right? And so we're going to just find a good, interesting sort of angle. And one thing you can do, one thing I actually encourage doing is just doing like a full 360 with the directional light, because you never quite know, like, you never quite know if you're going to find the right angle. You know, and this is something that most of the director of photographies that I've worked with on various shows and movies, it's like every time we would light a scene, at some point they would say, can you do just a 360 with the sun? And because you never know, you know, there might be better opportunities somewhere else with different rotations, right? And so just doing that just to see, you know, it doesn't take really much time. And then just finding an angle. I like to turn rotation snapping off when I'm adjusting the sun, because sometimes you just want like a little bit of difference. And so when we're looking at this, we're not just trying to look at what's the best light, we're trying to look at what's the best shadows too, like what's giving us the kind of aesthetic we're going for, right? So in this case, we want these sort of scraping shadows going by. Okay, and we'll just settle on something like that for now. And I'll drop this intensity also to like 5. And then we're also going to add a sky atmosphere. And the reason we add the sky atmosphere is really just to get a more like natural sort of blend going with the light. You can always just dial in the sunlight too, but the skylight can sometimes help with just getting a more appropriate look going on. It also kind of helps blend the HDRI sky with the sunlight itself. Like if you look at your sky, if you turn your sky atmosphere off and on, you'll see the actual color of your HDRI kind of shifts a little bit. And so the sky atmosphere just kind of helps blend everything together. And of course, you know, you can always play around with the actual, you know, settings in here until you get something that, you know, that you like. In this case, we're probably just going to leave it. We're just going to leave it basically, you know, how it is. The other thing here is with the directional light. I'm going to move this out of the way a little bit. There we go. With the directional light, we're going to change the source angle to something like 5, just to get some softer shadows. So, and again, this comes back to like aesthetically, what are you going for? So you don't have to necessarily increase the source angle. Me personally, I like the sort of soft, glowy look. So I'm going to increase my source angle to get these sort of like soft shadows going by. One thing with Megalights also that I've known is it sort of softens your light anyway, like detail in the light. But yeah, so that's just something to keep in mind as well, is that it can kind of make things not necessarily blobby. I'll just say softer, just make things a little bit softer. So anyway, increase that source angle. Then volumetric scatter, we're going to increase this to... No, we'll just increase to like 4 right now. All right, and the next thing is going to be the exponential height fog. Bring that in. And of course, we're going to turn on volumetric fog. And then we're going to go back to the directional light. Turn on light shaft occlusion. That really makes a big difference here. And one thing I like to do is I like to actually turn on light shaft bloom. But what I do is I'll reduce it. Otherwise, like you might get these like really bright, kind of crazy God rays. But yeah, so I'll do this just to kind of help boost that a little bit. So put it down to something like 0.04, which it's a really subtle difference, right? And so go ahead and try that. And so what we're going to do is we're going to come in here and we're going to turn this volumetric to a little bit more of like a blue tone. And we can come back and sort of change this, shift this a little bit. And then from here, we're going to do this directional light. It's a bit bright still, so we're going to reduce this down to let's say 1. Yeah. And so what we're doing here first and foremost is we're not trying to set up the sort of light pop, the sort of light sculpting right now. What we're trying to do is just set up a good foundation, a good base to work with. And that good base is always going to be a sky, it's going to be some sort of atmosphere, and it's going to be a sunlight. And so for this, again, always coming back to what are you trying to achieve here? What exactly, is the look and aesthetic you're going for? And so in this specific scenario, we want to make things, sort of pop. And the issue with doing that, trying to do it with just a directional light, so this might seem kind of counterintuitive, right? Because you would think, well, if I want to make things pop, if I want things to be really bright or whatever, then I'll just increase the, the directional light and get this really bright, and then I'll just like cast some shadows over here, which I mean, technically you can do. We can just come in here and, like block out some of these areas, like back there, for example, wherever that is, like so. And this is what, what you might commonly do, right? Is just take that directional light, put it there, and then, put up some sort of light blocker, adjust the fog, and basically say it's good, right? But what we want to do is we want to take it a step further, right? And so that's what we're going to be doing here. And so in order to do that, we're using the directional light instead as a base, and then we're going to actually be building the rest with spotlights and rectangle lights. And so we're going to do the exterior first, and then we'll do the interior. And so here, what we're going to do is we're going to come in here and we're going to grab some spotlights, and we're going to bring it up here. And what we're going to do is we're going to try to accentuate first the large shapes and then work through to the smaller shapes. And so in here, we're going to grab this spotlight, rotate it to look at this, like so. And we're going to increase the attenuation radius, and we're going to increase the intensity. What I tend to do is I will first crank that intensity up pretty high, maybe not that high. Crank it up pretty high. This way I can like really see like what it's doing and where's all that light going. And so with this, what we want to do is I'm going to do this in like 2 layers. So the first layer is going to be kind of a generalized sort of stronger accent light right here. And what we're going to want to do also is sort of match the light color. And so I already made a color here, but what you're going to want to do is, of course, we start from white, and then just try to find a tone that matches with that sky. So yeah, maybe something like this. There we go. And we can, of course, like adjust the attenuation radius and all that, and the cone angle, until we get something that we want. So even though we are using megalights and, you can have a bunch of lights overlapping, that doesn't necessarily always mean that you want a bunch of lights overlapping, if anything at this point for aesthetic. So in this case, for me and my own preference and taste, I kind of like it where it has a softer fall off. So it sort of hits the edge right here really sort of hard, and then it falls off. And the reason why I personally like that is because it's essentially going to create a gradient, which is kind of what we did with this lighting scenario here. Is this entire scene is in essence a gradient, right? Where it goes, from brighter over here and darker as it goes to the right. And again, that's just more sort of compositional tools to help you sort of lift up your lighting to the next level. And so here, so we're going to do this, and this one, it's a bit too bright for this. So we're going to reduce this to, let's say, 1500. What I'm trying to do is there's this little bit of highlight right here that I'm trying to remove, and I'll show you why in a moment. And so we'll just bring that to 1000 or 1500. And then I'm actually going to pull this back a little bit, like so. And then we're just going to just duplicate it, bring another one in closer. And then this way we can have a bit more control with like where the actual highlights go. And so we can just come in here and play with this until we just find something that works for what we're going for here. So for me personally, I want to add the most sort of attention to this central piece right here. And so I'm just gonna angle this a bit like so. And then again, playing with shadows and light. And then one thing also is like turn it off and on every now and then just to see like what you're doing here. And maybe with this, maybe we will increase it a little bit, just maybe 2000, like so. Yeah, 2000 right there. Cool. And so if we sort of do a before and after real quick between using the spotlights or just using the directional light at a higher intensity, you can already see the difference going on here, right? The difference as far as like how your eyes are being attracted to the scene and how your eyes are navigating the scene. So we'll go back to these spotlights, turn it back on. It's just giving it more like drama. And so from here, what we're gonna do is we're gonna take these spotlights and we're going to sort of play with them a little bit. This is a moment of exploration, just going through and, you know, figuring out like, you know, where are some other cool little areas to just sort of add some highlights, which ultimately is what you want to do. You know, you never want to like front light, you know, your scenes. Obviously, like try to sort of keep with the angle of the directionality of like where everything's going. So maybe I'll put a light over here somewhere. And again, while you're doing this, if you're going to do this, you know, always sort of going back and forth to see like, is it taking away from your central piece? So maybe I do like this light, but right now it's a bit too bright and it's taking away from, you know, the eyes going here. So we're just going to reduce this to like 500 maybe. And again, turning things off and on just to see. So right here, like it's a small subtle detail, but it helps, right? Again, we're sculpting with light here. We're bringing out details. One more thing as well to do with these kinds of lights is to actually turn off volumetric scattering intensity. So this way, otherwise you might get these sort of like fog triangles throughout your scene, which you don't really want. Like you don't want it to be like that obvious of what you're doing. And then just coming in here and, you know, just having a bit of fun with this and, you know, seeing what you can come up with. All right, and so as you build out your scene and you place your lights, and you'll end up with something similar to this, right? Something where you have a bit more shape, there's a bit more drama, more shadow depth, more light depth. Now, in this scene in particular, and this might be something sort of caught within, you know, your environment as well, is we are bringing attention to this piece right here. However, as we look at this, there's a few things that compositionally are sort of fighting us. So again, if we go in here, so if I bring this into Pure Ref real quick, And we see, we have the highest value of light is here, obviously. But then one thing you'll notice is the light value here on this rock and like here on these panels over here are fairly similar. Like they're pretty close, right? And of course that's because of the directional light. It's the same with like the light here is actually the same light right here, right? But when you're doing this, one thing you don't want to happen is you don't want your environments to, or your foreground elements to blend with your backgrounds, right? You want to pull this forward. And the light, the shadows that we're getting here are starting to do that. But this piece right here is holding it back from like really pulling it forward, right? Because this is almost coming along for the ride, and we don't want that. So there's a few things we can do, one of which is the always tried and true, grab yourself a cube and make it a certain size. And you could do like custom shapes, and there's a few different ways to actually do this, but this is probably the most like well-known and simplest way of doing it is just the handy dandy cube method. And you block this, you flag this off, and you do this, and now it's in shadow. And then you set this to like hidden in game and all that, and that that kind of works. But another thing that we can do, first of all, I'm gonna turn volumetric off for this. But the other thing we can do is we can actually just come in here and grab a color correct region. And if you're unfamiliar with color correct regions, these are just really great volumes of color correction. And so there's different sort of shape. We're just going to grab a box and we're just going to scale this up, and I'll make it pretty big, just like that. And then in 5.5, there's now this open color grading button, which is pretty useful, pretty cool. And here we could just, start turning this down, right? So we can just turn down the gain, the gamma, the contrast even. So we can basically just, oops, there we go, darken this. One thing I like about the color correct region is the actual like control you have over like how this looks. Obviously, if you're going for something that is like most, I guess, realistic, then yeah, you just do like the shadow blocker. But this is something that I did want to really just like showcase, because it's something that I feel isn't used as often as maybe it could and should. And then we can come in here and we can turn this fall off to like 0, so it's a bit bigger. Cool. So now it's darker. Now it's sort of more so matching this, right? And we can still flag this off if we wanted to, but now we have this this darker sort of cliff back there. So when we go into this interior, we can see that by default it looks like this, which doesn't really look like much of what we want it to be looking like. So first and foremost, when you are doing an interior like this, you do want to figure out what is the lowest point, like what is the darkest you want it to be. And you want to first start at that baseline. One of the issues really with interiors and just a game engine in general is like the light bounce. And so if you can keep it dark and then add lights in, that's always great. So what we're going to do in this specific scenario is I'm going to grab one of these lights. I'm just going to move it. I'm going to move this over like this. And one thing you can always do as well is you can always place a camera in there. Like for me, I have this one, and you can always pin it. And so in this camera, you'll see this little pin, you can pin it. And so this way you can like see what you're doing as you are up here. And so we're just going to push this light through. And what we're going to do also is take this volumetric scatter intensity and we're going to crank it up, like maybe not 500, maybe 200, maybe 100. Let's see. Just playing with the values here. And actually, wait, no, actually this one we're not really going to worry with the volumetric scattering. This one we really just want to get the exposure in here. We want to, this one is going to be focused more so on the actual light transmitting through the environment. And so this, yeah, this is probably a good little spot. For this, I will do some softer shadows, so we'll just increase the source radius here, like so. Okay, and then we'll do the same thing back here. This one we might have to make a little bit brighter, just because it's like coming through this really small opening. Okay, and so now we're starting to get some light shining through. And then what we can do is now we can sort of increase that volumetric scatter. And then the same with this one. All right, and then next thing we're going to do is bring in some of these lantern lights. So with this, we're just going to take some point lights. And this would be a good time also to have a camera set up. So for example, mine is just set up right here in the doorway. These are the settings I have. These are usually the settings I almost universally always use, is Super 35 film back, crop setting of 239, and then just whatever focal length seems to work, you know. So, but yeah, so film back, crop setting, at least my preference. And then here, what we're going to do is just going to make this a bit orange. All right, and then make sure we have a lantern here. And then we'll reduce this to like a value of like 2. Then we'll put it in here, and then just increase the source radius to like 5 or 10 or something like that. Okay. And then again, referring back to your camera, looking at this, and right now we're just putting in some what I'd call preliminary lights. So we'll end up moving these, you know, to whatever might work, but just getting these set up somewhere. So let's say here, let's put one here, and then we'll put one, again, right now I'm looking through my camera as I'm moving around. And we'll put one over here. Maybe we'll put this one like on the ground somewhere. Nah. Oh, there's a lantern right here. So there we go. Just put this over in that one. Okay, and so it's starting to come along. But as we can see here, even though we're doing the S-curve, we're sort of ping-ponging the lights, the other thing to do is actually play around with light intensity. Because even though your eyes like to go through the path of least resistance, your eyes also go to the brightest thing in the room. You know, we're like little moths, each of us. So this light, its position works fine, but it's a bit too bright. And even though you would think like, well, they should all be the same brightness, in this specific scenario, when we're lighting for a camera, it's not necessarily the case. So with this one, we'll try to just dim it a little bit, 0.25 maybe. Let's see. Okay. And see the difference between what this was between 0.25 and then 5. At 5, it really draws the eyes, but at 0.25, you know, not so much. All right, cool. So this is starting to get us somewhere, but we're still having these really dark areas, right? It's not quite to the standard, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to play with the lights a little bit more. So that's where this whole megalight thing really comes in handy, because you know, the amount of lights, the amount of shadow casting lights. It really says like, forget about it with that kind of stuff. So we're just going to come in here and we'll grab a rec light and bring it over here. And we never actually look in this direction, so it's fine to just kind of put it in a good spot over here. Just increase that attenuation radius. We might end up doing a spotlight instead. We'll see. Play with that barn door angle. Length. And then again, make sure to pin that camera. Might be a bit too much. So we'll bring this, what we'll do is we'll bring this a little bit out over here. Okay. Like so, and then we'll just reduce it a little bit like that. Okay, and then the other thing is grab a point light. And one thing that can really help elevate your lighting is using what are called IES profiles. And if you go into Fab actually and search for IES, there's a bunch of there's a few really good packs. This is the one I have. There's also this one. You can also just download IES profiles. If you just type Google IES profiles, you can just find them online as well. And you just bring them in. But IES profiles can really help with giving your lights shape, which can really just add an extra sort of dimension. So for example, let's say we wanted to sort of add some light over here, and I'm just gonna color pick this real quick. But let's say we wanted to add like an ambient light over here. You know, we can always just put a point light over here, or, you know, a spotlight or whatever, and put it up like this. And it sort of does, you know, what it's doing. But we can also just come in here and we scroll down, IES profiles, and we can start getting some more like interesting shapes with our lights here. And that's what I did with this one. So with this one, if I were to go through and actually turn off all these point lights, we see the scene looks, you know, it looks fine, it looks okay. But then as we start adding back, you know, these different point lights, lanterns, we see it starts adding a bit more depth to it, right? We're getting some silhouettes now. So whereas back here, for example, it basically after this lantern, it just all went into shadow. But instead back here, what we're doing is we're creating a silhouette. So again, taking every opportunity you can to just kind of place lights. And these are all using IES profiles. They're all using this one, this wall T-star, which looks like this. And because it just adds a sort of like shadow to it as well. And it's the same thing with the light out here. It's using that same one. And because it just adds a bit of shape. It's a difference between sort of this look, and if we hide this real quick and just add a spotlight. So we'll do this, and we'll just like increase this and do that. Okay. So if you do a spotlight, for example, you'll get something like this. And then if we use that IES, we get something like this. So this volumetric might be a bit too high. Turn that down a little bit. And so, you know, it could just be preference, but, you know, to me, I think that one works pretty good. All right, and so we'll go back to this level. And if you notice, kind of a difference here, right? So we're doing this, and this right now is kind of looking a little dusty, a little warm, whereas this one here had a bit more contrast to it. It looks a bit more like nighttime. And so that's all done through the post-process volume. And so we're going to go ahead and set that up. And so a few things would be go in here, actually use our post-process volume here. All right, so we're going to come in here, and it's going to be really just playing with these color grading settings. So going in here, also of course adding a little bit of bloom. Like I said, I'm a sucker for bloom. And then again, see these, like, if you don't turn off volumetrics, you get these just like fog triangles. So just turn that off for this shot. Okay. All right. And so in here, we're going to go into this temperature and turn this down a little bit. All right. And that's already helping, right? That's already getting some of that warmth out. So it's turning down the temperature. And again, this right here is just a bit of exploration. So going through temp, tint, going through and adjusting these settings as well. For this one, one thing that can help with this is just increasing some of this contrast, like to the midtones. So if we look here, for example, if we go into midtone specifically, if you go to global and do contrast, it's a bit too much. But if you just go to midtones, contrast, and just increase this a little bit, it'll give you just a little bit of pop to your lights. And it can just be, really useful like that. And then you can always come in here as well and sort of adjust these colors here and change these. Change that. Okay. Like so. And so lastly, what you can do is you can actually apply a LUT to your scene. So LUTs are something which I like to use. I'm a bit more comfortable with it. So me personally, I prefer using LUTs. And so we're going to go through and look at how to set up a LUT for this. So the actual specific LUT that you're going to want to use will be linked also in the description down below. Like, so if you have like this in here, or if it's not like perfect, it doesn't really matter. We're just going to be color grading in here. And then what we're going to do is grab these adjustment layers, and we're going to just start playing with some of these values. So you can, sort of do the color adjustments that you like, so, something that you want to do, a specific look and aesthetic. One filter, again, if you want to make your scene sort of pop, one filter that can be really useful is this under color lookup, go to load 3D and go to bleach bypass. And you see it kind of does this crazy thing, right? But if we just turn this opacity down, and again, this will also help just make things pop. And you only need a little bit. Like, I wouldn't go too far with it. But, the difference between this and that, it's a subtle difference, but it's a noticeable difference. And then seeing how this works with the curve, maybe keep this a little bright. And yeah, just adding whatever sort of filters you want in here. Go ahead and do that. All right, and then once you're done, once you get the color grading that you like, so we could look at this before, after, just a little bit of pop. We could, reduce some of these reds as well if you want. Because this barn is red, I'm not gonna really remove any of the reds, because then it'll start to just get rid of it. So, and you can't like color isolate with a LUT. So we're going to then take all of these right here, and we're just going to Control C. We're going to open up our color lookup in Photoshop and just Control V, and then just save this as, as a file on your desktop or in a folder. And then what you're going to do, once you have that set up, is make sure to open it, change it to no mip maps, color lookup table, and HDR. These are the settings you're going to want for it. You'll know if you did it wrong because your coloring is going to look weird when you use it. Let's go ahead and take this. It'll be under color grading, miscellaneous. So as you can see, this technique can be really effective to really make your environments pop, really accentuate the, these specific assets and areas in which you're trying to really showcase, to really bring things to the front, as opposed to leaving it muddled, sort of in obscurity in the background. And where the Megalights feature fits in actually is going to be right here. So if we go over here to show FPS, and we actually look at the performance we're getting here. So in here, we're on high scalability. Just to note, by the way, as I was on a forum and I saw someone bring up this question, a cinematic mode is meant for cinematics. It's not really meant for like runtime gameplay. So if you're balancing your game in a certain scalability, I'd suggest doing it in scalability high here. That being said, so here we are, we're getting, about 70 to 85 frames per second. And then if we toggle Megalights off and on, you see we actually, with it off, we lose about 15 to 20 frames per second. If we turn it back on, we gain it. It also sort of changes the shadows a little bit here. And if you want to actually visualize what you're doing, we can use the console commands, but you can also just use the tried and true optimization view mode, light complexity. And if we turn Megalights off, this is something that, a lot of people that do lighting that you're probably familiar with seeing this view mode. But you see all this is usually what we tend to stay away from. Traditionally, before this feature, we'd have to sort of optimize around this and make sure that we have as little of these sort of purple and white areas as possible so that we, make sure that we're hitting target frame rate. But with Megalights, you see that all just kind of goes away. I hope you all enjoyed this video. Lighting is such a wide-ranging topic, crossing over into camera, color theory, composition, and so many other subject matters. If there's a particular subject you'd be curious to learn about, please just let me know in the comments down below. I would also love to see what you guys create for this tutorial, so please post your artwork in the Discord channel. Until next time, I'll see you guys in the next one.